若すぎ。俺とて何度この世界を更地に変えてやろうと思ったか知れぬ。だがあいつがそれに耐えているのに、奴が一番この世界を憎んでいるはずの奴が耐えているのに、俺たちに何ができる。
Gintama is one of the most bizarre stories I've ever experienced, and it's simultaneously one that requires a large amount of patience to understand exactly what the series is all about. At the time of making this video, it has close to 400 episodes released over the span of 13 years, and multiple movies to boot, and many of these entries sit at the very top of the most highly rated anime of all time on websites like MyAnimeList. Yet, as undeniable as it is that the show has quality, it can also be argued that there is an equally undeniable barrier to entry for the series for people who are curious about it. The first reason for this is the sheer length, as I mentioned, but the second is that for plenty of new viewers, Gintama is likely to require a ton of patience. I'm not saying that it is impossible for someone to be super into it from the start, but the earlier episodes are a very lighthearted, comedic, slow burn, and while that is not a bad thing at all, it is entirely understandable that someone could watch a few of them and kinda wonder what all the hype is about. The writing is sharp and witty from the start, but I definitely found my interest wavering early on, and kind of drifting through the comedy a bit as I waited in bated breath for the darker, dramatic, and more weighty stuff to come. This was a mistake on my part. The quality of the show, especially early on, has a ton of peaks and valleys as it lays foundations and introduces characters and concepts. It isn't the most tightly structured or consistent anime in the world in the first season for me, and enjoyment will likely differ vastly depending on which arc or episode you're on. Yet, it must be said that very little, if any, of the show is padding or filler due to the type of story this is, and this fact lends some insight into part of where it finds its identity. Gintama has a very self-referential sort of style when it comes to all of its aspects. The comedy, the drama, the weight, and more are all dependent on the viewer being introduced to prior elements, and they are constantly being built upon after the foundation is laid. In my opinion, while you may be tempted, you cannot skip a bunch of Gintama episodes to get to a really funny or really dramatic arc and still get the full emotional and narrative impact of what's happening. This is partly because there is a huge amount of continuity within the story, and minor plot threads and characters turn up later on with larger roles and impact, but there are structural reasons too. Without getting into the specifics, the show banks on prior viewer knowledge and exposure to the world and its characters to be able to get optimal enjoyment out of all aspects of the later stuff, whether it be the extremely dark and heart-pounding sequences, the big moments of emotion, the slice of life stuff, or even just wacky comedy. This may come off as nothing special in the way I describe it here, as something akin to the classic case of building an emotional connection with characters to allow the big moments to shine as they do in shows like Steins Gate. But it really isn't that simple, because Gintama takes it to another level and integrates this with virtually every element of the story. This gradual start is not a case of, when do we see the real Gintama, because Gintama is spinning its web and planting the seeds from episode 1. It just may take dozens of episodes before you realize what it's done. Or at least, that was the case with me.
とて、美しく最後を飾り付ける暇があるなら、最後まで美しく生きようじゃねえか。
Those who have watched the show will no doubt know that there is a clear stylistic variation in the types of episodes that Gintama has. I am simplifying it a bit, but by and large, there is a dichotomy between comedic arcs and arcs that are much more serious. There are also several semi-serious arcs with more or less equal parts of both styles, but to me, there is a clear line drawn between the lighthearted and the heavy in the series, the common denominator between them being a very distinct and usually palpable sense of sentiment, heart, emotion, and empathy throughout, due in large part to its themes. What I eventually began wondering as my interest and engagement slowly grew and began to learn what the series was about was the following. Which of the two styles is the true identity, heart, and soul of Gintama? The light arcs or the heavy, darker stuff? Again, in wondering this, I found that I was making a mistake, because the truth is that the story's identity is both and everything in between. As is said many times throughout the series, there is no light without the dark. It is a consistent thematic idea that is communicated again and again in various ways, and it integrates with the style and structure of the story to give Gintama a unique sort of duality. It is one of the most impressive allegorical works I've ever seen in terms of communicating the concept of seeking the light through the darkness, something that is explored through the themes in each of the arcs, but arguably more deeply presented through the show's structure and main character. Gintoki has experienced poverty, war, battles, death, and terrors unimaginable. He's lived through it all and seen the horrors of the world. For any regular person, this would cause them to crumble and withdraw and avoid and repress these memories and the feelings associated with them. But as we come to eventually learn, Gintoki instead confronts them and resolves to use them as his strength. His experiences have shown him what he values, and as such, they've reinforced his will and desire to simply live a life of peace and happiness with those he cares about. And he has an unshakable conviction to protect that, no matter what.
耳の穴かっぽじってよーく聞け。俺は安い国なんぞのために戦ったことは一度たりともねえ。国が滅ぼうが侍が滅ぼうがどうでもいいんだよ。俺は昔から。今も昔も俺の守るもんは何一つ。
Due to his past and the life he seeks to live, Gintoki is constantly forced to combat threats that plague the lives of both him and those he cares about. But he does this to have a world where he and his loved ones can get into stupid hijinks and argue about dumb stuff and laze around and have fun once more. That sort of life is his salvation. And this is where we circle back to the topic of this show's style and dependence on prior investment. As I said, to me, this show is all about a distinct duality. The fashion in which the narrative style changes repeatedly from lighthearted to extremely heavy as the show wears on, the way in which the characters truly deeply care for one another underneath the lighthearted antics, the subtly impressive world that is slowly crafted as a byproduct of the silliness of the story. There are layers upon layers here, and a flip side to everything. But this is best exemplified through our protagonist, because despite how aloof, sarcastic, and detached Gintoki seems, there is absolutely no one in this story that values connection and true happiness as much as he does, and no one with as much hope. There are many visual images that characterize Gintoki for me. On the humorous side, perhaps one of him picking his nose with those dead fish eyes. Or for a more serious description, a bloodied image of him on the battlefield, protecting those he loves. But the most appropriate for me is neither and both of these. Just like the entire series, the man himself is a synthesis of both sides and so much more. And for that reason, the most striking and accurate image of Gintoki for me is something that we're treated to quite often. Him looking seemingly annoyed at the antics of his best friends, perhaps turning away in irritation, only for a small but very genuine smile to creep up on his face. It captures everything about the man for me. His nature, his humor, his pure happiness to be able to share his life with those he loves, and through this smile, a hint at his desire to do anything and everything to protect that happiness.
逃げろなんてもう言わせねえよ。一人で何もかも背負い込もうなんざ水くせえじゃねえか。涙垂れ流して助けを乞いやがれ。鼻水垂れ流して俺にすがりやがれ。泣きてえ時には泣けばいいんだ。笑いたい時には笑えばいいんだ。てめえが醜い面で泣きわめいている時はそれ以上汚え面で泣いてやる。 てめえが腹抱えて笑ってる時はそれ以上バカでかい声で笑ってやる。それでいいんだよ。
君も道に迷ってここにたどり着いたんでしょう。私もそうです。未だに迷っている。それでいい。悩んで迷って君は君の思う侍になればいい。
Yoshida Shoyo was never someone to hide his obliviousness and wide-eyed wonder at the world, but he did know what it meant to be a samurai. Simply to become better, to improve, to get stronger, more knowledgeable, to be a better person. Being a samurai means self-improvement in any aspect of the word. Whether it be a war-torn child who had to grow up and harden himself faster than any child ever should, or a poor, troubled soul who had no idea what to do with his life, or an intelligent, broad-minded youth just looking for a place to belong, Shoyo gathered these young people and gave them home and hearth, a life to live, and this goal to strive for. They once were lost, and then they were found. He is the reason that Takasugi and Gintoki were able to live functional lives of value. He was their everything, and he was taken away from them. Not for any good reason, not because he did something heinous to deserve it, simply because life is unfair. With his life pitted against Katsura's and Takasugi's, there was only ever going to be one answer for Gintoki as to who should live. Not because he cared any less for Shoyo, but because he knew what Shoyo would have wanted for him. And so, he carried the burden.
あの人を奪ったこの世界をぶっ潰すしかあるめえよ。なあズラ、お前はこの世界で何を思って生きる？俺たちから先生を奪ったこの世界をどうして享受し、のうのうと生きていける？俺はそいつが腹立たしくてならねえ。
Consistent with his solitude and earlier behavior prior to enrolling in Shoyo's school, Takasugi views his death as a reinforcement of the idea that this world is hell, a worthless cesspool of death with no meaning, just there to be destroyed. He wants to exact vengeance upon the society and system that took his sensei from him, to leave not a trace of the old world order behind. And this is where he and Gintoki diverge. Because Gintoki doesn't take his eyes off of the world that Shoyo tried to bring about. He is devastated beyond belief at the death of his master, but sees it as reason to reinforce his ideals. Shoyo would not have wanted Takasugi to go his route. He would have wanted him to persevere and continue and protect, not destroy. In a situation like this, it is so easy to just give up and submit to hatred. However, as we know, that is not the type of person Gintoki is. Despite what he felt, despite what the world seemed to be telling him to do, Gintoki grabs hold of Shoyo's legacy and does him the greatest respect by carrying it out. Shoyo admitted to a young Takasugi that he was kind of making things up as he went along, that he was lost. But I think he found what he was looking for through the connections he formed with his students. In people. And so did all of his students in return. They all found a place to belong and solace through one another, but the key difference here is that when that home was taken away, one man chose hatred and darkness and destruction, and the other held firm in his conviction and hope.
似ていたか、あの二人は商用に。
似てない。一人は商用が残したものを守ろうとしていた。一人は商用の残したものを壊そうとしていた。でも同じだった。二人とも悲しい目をしてた。
Takasugi laments his and his comrades' weakness and their inability to save their sensei, but whether he realizes it or not, his new idea of strength is more akin to a flaming, soul-destroying rage. Shoyo looked towards something different and kinder, a more empowering sort of idea. In spite, and ironically because of his past sorrows, Gintoki epitomizes optimistic spirit, and he values every single connection he makes. And this light and dark dichotomy is what I believe to be the crux of Gintama's thematic resonance. Hope or nihilism? Is it really worth it to suffer in the hopes of a better day, even when all seems lost? Is the duality of the human condition a tragedy worth persevering through, or is it just better to give up? There's only ever one answer for Gintoki, as his experiences have proved to him that the joys of connection and love far overpower the pain of loss. Takasugi dismissed the notion of being a true samurai, as Shoyo would put it, but his rival never stopped trying to be better, never stopped protecting what he loved. Life is fleeting, but no matter what, there is always a light, and the good times are always worth having.
銀時後のことは頼みましたよ。仲間をみんなを守ってあげてくださいね。
Gintoki's devotion to this aspect of life is so incredibly strong that a feral animal seems to come out the instant he sees those he cares for threatened, and who can blame him? He has learned that connection, affection, and vulnerability are a human's greatest strength for how these bonds can bring joy and empower you. Putting yourself out there and caring for others sure as hell puts you at risk of being hurt, but it also benefits your life exponentially. So in the dark times, when it is hard to see the sun, fight with all you can to protect the lives and dreams of those you love, so you can all reach a better day together and be able to get on each other's nerves again. It's incredibly heartwarming, and through the teachings of Shoyo, Gintoki has learned to use his sword to protect and defend this. It's a philosophy that took hold of him due to how well his master exemplified and displayed it as he lived his life, and how fiercely he cared for Gintoki, and as a result, he never lost sight of it and continued to fight for what Shoyo-Sensei stood for, even after his cruel death. The world can be brutal and destructive, but will giving up on it and destroying it in turn truly bring happiness? Is happiness even possible? Gintoki believes that it is so, and never gives up on it.
どんな場所だろうとよ、どんな境遇だろうとよ、太陽はあるんだぜ。てめえのお日さんがよ。雲に隠れて見えなくなっちまうこともよくあるがよ。それでも空を見上げてりゃ、必ず雲の隙間から面を出す時がやってくる。だからよ、俺たちはそいつを見失わねえように、空を仰ぎ見ることをやめちゃいけねえんだ。背筋ちゃんと伸ばしてお天道様まっすぐ見て生きてかにはならねえんだ。
And it's not just Gintoki either. All of these characters have some sort of past tragedies, sins, darknesses, or pains that they had to overcome in order to be where they are by the current point in the series. And yet, they all do this for the same reason: to see those better days. But this sort of meaning extends from the cast and can be attributed to the series as a whole for me. Earlier, the comedy doesn't do much emotionally for a first-time watcher, but over time, that tends to change. I found myself much more invested in the lighter arcs later on due to a combination of the repetition and exposure to the characters and prior occasions of them being in much more deadly situations. To put it simply, I grew to like these characters through seeing them in different contexts, and I wanted them to have fun and be happy. I found myself at the edge of my seat in the dark moments because I had adhered myself so tightly to the characters beforehand and genuinely wanted them to survive and live peacefully, and this in turn further strengthened my investment in later comedic arcs, which subsequently strengthened my investment in the darker arcs, and so on. As time goes by, you grow to understand Gintoki through understanding this story's structure. There will always be dark, serious times, and there will always be light. The key is to fight through these troubles and protect what you value so that the light can shine again. And in narrative terms, each style is made bolder and more effective by the other. It is a risky, double-edged sword of a formula, and it requires very adept writing and presentation so that it doesn't become stale, but if pulled off well, good God does it work. Exponentially. It is a quality that is really truly earned, perhaps in the most organic way I've ever seen in a story. The episodes tick by, dozens and dozens, and you enjoy the off-the-wall comedy and clever dialogue and references as good old-fashioned entertainment, but eventually it becomes something more. For those who love it, the connection with these characters and this weird-ass story sneaks up on you until you find yourself unable to let go. Gintama slowly became a huge part of my life as I watched. It is one of the most unique viewing experiences I've ever had. The series is far from one of the tightest stories I've ever seen, the quality definitely wavers as I said, and of course, the comedy may not work with everyone, but it deceptively taps into something special through a unique brand of depth and duality that has become its novelty. For most who have grown to become fans of the story, something special and very gradual happens as you watch or read. And despite my best attempts here, words cannot do it justice. But I bet that a lot of you know exactly what I'm talking about.
たとえ主君などいなくとも、友のため、大切なもののため、譲れぬ信念のため、人はそれぞれの主君がために、それぞれの侍になることはできる。どんな混迷の中でも、人は己なりの美しいと思う生き方を見つけ出すことはできる。
This combination, the theme of reaching the light, of pursuing happiness and protecting what you love, how it dovetails with the two-pronged nature of the comedy and weight of the story, and how it is encapsulated with the past and present journeys of Gintoki, it taps into something truly resonant and indescribable that makes the journey of Gintama more than worth the investment. Many thanks for watching.
夜明け前が一番暗え。だが目をつむるなよ。闇から目へそらしたやつには明日に差す光も見えねえ。たとえこの先どんなに深い夜が待っていてもな。